Once, I was on my way to visit friends at their dacha. It was a typical Friday after work. As evening approached, looking forward to the taste of barbecue and beer, I was speeding along the highway from the city towards their countryside retreat. It was only about 30 kilometers away, and I knew the route by heart, as if I could navigate it with my eyes closed. It was straightforward most of the way, with just one turn towards the village of Grafskoye at the very end. On this particular day, there was rain and thunder, reducing visibility on the road, so I was driving more cautiously than usual. Getting into an accident was the last thing on my agenda for today. Halfway there, I found myself stuck in a traffic jam. How on earth could a traffic jam form on this road? After 2 hours of crawling, I finally saw the cause: road construction. Of course, just my luck. Whenever I'm on the road, there are always adventures to be had: road repairs, accidents, you name it. Well, I'd have to take a detour. And as luck would have it, right before the roadblock set up by the workers, there was an exit onto a dirt road with a sign indicating that it led to the village, though the sign was so weathered that the village name was barely legible. Well, maybe it wouldn't be so bad to take a little extra time to bypass the construction and then speed on to my friends. I noticed that I was the only one willing to take the detour. All the other cars promptly turned around and headed back towards the city. It seemed odd. Did they know of a shorter route, perhaps? No matter, I had already taken the exit onto the dirt road, and I wasn't keen on turning back. This road was devoid of streetlights, and it seemed rarely traveled, making it difficult to discern much in the rain, which had washed away its surface. I was determined not to get stuck in the muddy mess of clay and earth. The journey was particularly challenging in my not-so-new car. Eventually, I saw the distant outlines of houses. It was already past midnight, and the rain had turned into a small hailstorm. Great, just what I needed. Driving further in such weather was almost impossible, so I decided to call my friends and let them know I would arrive by morning, hoping someone in the village would provide shelter for the night. I grabbed my phone, but of course no signal. It was the 21st century, and yet, venture just a couple of kilometers off the main road, and you'd think you'd traveled back in time. Well, I hoped my friends wouldn't go searching for me in the middle of the night, and they'd simply fall asleep, and by morning I'd arrive. I reached the first houses in the village. It appeared that this village consisted of a single road with small houses on either side. Speaking of the houses, they looked far from habitable. I didn't see lights in any of the windows, but that didn't surprise me. It was late, after all. Although, were there even people here? Then, a flash of lightning revealed a silhouette on the road. It was tall, perhaps lanky, with arms seemingly longer than a regular person's. It was dressed in tattered clothing, and, in that brief moment of illumination, darted toward the nearest house. All of this happened in an instant. I thought maybe, due to the poor visibility and fatigue, I had imagined a monster. It must have been a person seeking shelter from the hailstorm, running to their home. I reasoned with myself. Reluctantly, I got out of the car. The rain was so heavy that standing outside for just 30 seconds would leave you drenched. But I had no choice. I parked as close as I could to the house the person had entered. I grabbed my bag, which contained some money in case they asked for payment for shelter. I mustered my strength and dashed out from under the leaking porch, thoroughly soaking myself. It instantly turned chilly, and the cold penetrated my wet clothes. What a lovely October evening. The porch where I found myself was leaking, but it was better than standing in the pouring rain. I knocked on the door, calling out, "Anyone home? Is there anyone here?" Silence. I knocked again. Still no response. I tried the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. What should I do? Running to another house meant getting even more wet, and I'd likely catch a cold. I couldn't afford that. Maybe I should go around the house to see if there's another door. I had to investigate. With this plan in mind, I moved along the wall of the house, briefly glancing into a window. For a moment it seemed like I saw some movement inside. Carefully navigating through the impassable thicket of bushes, I reached the back of the house. There was indeed a door leading to the garden, although I wasn't sure if these crosses on the ground were part of a garden anymore. Wait, crosses? Where did these crosses come from? The backyard of this house resembled an old cemetery more than a garden. Something was amiss. Before I could dwell on what I'd seen, the door behind me creaked open with a deafening sound. Without much thought, I dove inside, and the door shut. Must have been a draft. The inside of the house reeked of dampness and decay. Well, at least the rain was no longer a problem. I took out my phone and turned on the flashlight, briefly noticing that the battery was down to 15%. I started scanning the room with the flashlight. A table, a chair, some cups, plates. I was in the kitchen. Then I remembered I'd barged into the house without an invitation. I should at least let the owners know I was here. Is anyone home? Would you kindly provide shelter for the night? I can offer payment if needed. Silence was my only response, interrupted only by the sound of rain drumming on the roof. So, if no one was here, maybe I could spend the night unnoticed. If the owners returned, I'd explain myself properly. Time for a plan. I needed to find a bed. No way I was sleeping on the floor. It certainly wouldn't do. I couldn't find a bed in the kitchen, so I decided to explore further inside the house. The floor creaked loudly with each step, and the atmosphere was far from comforting. It was a dark night, an old house with its own cemetery out back and the creaking floorboards. It felt like every horror movie combined. A chill ran down my spine. I walked through the kitchen and entered a small room. Enormous clocks adorned the wall. You know, the kind that chime the hour with the number of gongs corresponding to the time. They looked ancient, their hands darkened with age. In this room I also noticed a table with what appeared to be dirty rags smeared with something I couldn't quite identify. The room was in a state of disarray, with peeling wallpaper, a water-stained ceiling, and overall, it was eerie. A rusty spring bed stood nearby. Its headboard was rusted, making it clear that no one lived here. No one would sleep on such an old bed, except me. I didn't expect to fall asleep so suddenly. After all, I had been sleep-deprived from a full week of work, and I'd been on the road for over 5 hours. Those 30 kilometers to the dacha seemed endless. Without much ceremony, I plopped down on the bed, grateful that it didn't collapse, and hoped to get some rest. My fears seemed to have vanished. I was awakened by an unfamiliar noise, as if someone were walking in the kitchen, and the floorboards squeaked unpleasantly under their steps. Blinking and trying to understand my situation, I sat up on the bed and called out, "Is there anyone here?" The steps ceased, but someone was clearly present. I got up and went to the kitchen. No one was there. I turned on the flashlight on my phone. The floor was covered in fresh mud. What was moving around in the filth? And where did it go? My thoughts grew tangled in fear. I turned to leave the kitchen and saw a tall shadow dart into the room. The floor was again smeared with dry dirt, leading to a small hatch on the ground. How did I miss it when I entered this room? Well, maybe I should go down there. What if there's something interesting? For instance, a vampire. All right then, let's do it. So I stooped to open the hatch. The handle was filthy and smelled like I almost saw my lunch again. It reeked of ham. Opening the hatch, I shone my phone's light down below. There were wooden steps descending into darkness, and I couldn't see anything further. Great! Descending into the unknown. I also noticed my phone battery was down to 5%. All right, let's go down quickly, survey the area, deal with any unwanted guests, and then get some sleep. That sounds like a plan. As I was about to go down, something pushed me from behind, and I tumbled headfirst. Silence. My head was throbbing. I was lying on something hard and uncomfortable. Running my fingers over it, I realized it was porous and solid. A bone. I jolted to my feet and illuminated the area with my flashlight. The basement floor was covered in bones and human skulls. I was overwhelmed by fear. Where had I ended up? Who had pushed me? How could I escape from here? While my thoughts slowly processed what had happened after the blow to my head, I became aware of movement in the corner. Something was there, and it was eating, judging by the chewing sounds. Suddenly, the sound ceased, and whatever it was began slowly rising. It was about 2.5 meters tall, with long, dry legs and arms that hung below its knees. Its fingers were either claw-like or just long and bony. I couldn't be sure. Its head was unusually jagged, as if it were a gnawed skull without visible eyes. I was petrified as it let out a terrifying scream and lunged at me. Dropping my phone, I managed to barely evade its grasp and fell to the floor. I had to get up and run, but the creature was already upon me. In this second encounter, I failed to defend myself, and it clawed my chest. Pain shot through my entire body, and not just mine, it seemed. With a blood-curdling scream, the creature fell beside me. A Swiss Army knife was lodged in its chest. I needed to run, and I certainly didn't have a second knife. I jumped up and scrambled up the stairs, grabbing my phone from the floor. I could hear the creature, the one I'd taken for a vampire or a monster, was back on its feet and chasing me. With all the strength I had left, I climbed up the steep stairs, not caring about the decaying filth underfoot. Suddenly, something grabbed my ankle and pulled me downward. Thankfully, my boots had zippers, not laces. I quickly unzipped one and left my boot with the fiend as I plummeted upwards. Opening the hatch, it was already dawn outside. I grabbed my bag, then hurled myself at the entrance door, the one I had bolted earlier, with the hope of breaking it down. Whether it was due to my lack of strength or my own weight, the door met me with a deafening thud, and I was sent flying backward. A bolt! There was a bolt on the door, and I had been a complete idiot. Swiftly getting to my feet, I ran to the door, unfastened the bolt, and at that moment, I heard the repugnant breathing right behind me. Without looking, I flung the door open and dashed outside. The rain had already stopped, and a thick fog lay on the ground. I hopped into my car, yanked up the handbrake, and drove away. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I saw only the old cemetery, no sign of the house. And in the street, 5 of those grotesque creatures were staring after me. I finally reached my dacha. When my friends saw me the next morning, they were left utterly speechless. I was covered in dirt, drenched in blood from my chest wound, missing a boot, and looked like I had just wrestled with a nightmare. I recounted the whole story. My friend gave me a puzzled look and said, "There's no village there. It's just an ancient cemetery. It appeared after... Wait a minute, there used to be a village, but it burned down over 100 years ago. Everyone who lived there perished. They buried the village's inhabitants right on the spot where it once stood."